Hello and welcome to another episode of the Expert CPG Commerce Podcast. My name is Ryan Flynn, founder and CEO of Expert CPG Commerce, where we help brands reach more customers on Amazon and beyond. And today I'm really excited to welcome Jim Fish from GT Promotions to the show. He is a broker with an immense experience, started out when he was really young in the grocery industry, checking out at a register, standing on a box. He's got a good story on that. But I mean, helps brands really navigate the world of grocery as a broker and helping them grow their brand, not only initially, but over time as well. So Jim's got some great insight. And if you're a brand and you're struggling with Amazon, which is what we help brands with, we would love to actually show you what we could be doing in Amazon. So many brands we talk to don't understand all the levers they can be pulling, or they're frustrated by this Amazon policy or the way Amazon's doing things or what happened to their products, whatever it may be. And so what we love to do is we actually like to show a brand what they can be doing, not just tell them. So we provide an audit, an in-depth audit, where we go into your Seller Central account, we look at your pages as customers can view them, but also look at the data behind those pages. And we look for opportunities and show you what you could actually be doing, where you're missing things, and some things that are also working well, hopefully. So you can just go to expertcpg.com/audit, fill in some information there. We'll see if you qualify, and we would love to provide you with that audit. Again, expertcpg.com/audit, and fill in your information, and would love to see if we can help you. All right, let's go on to the conversation with Jim Fish from GT Promotions. Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Just fine, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on. I know I'm really excited to talk with you today on your background, right? All the experiences, years of experience you've had across your career, but especially in the grocery world, the broker world, and just helping our listeners understand that world and caveats, pitfalls. And I think you're going to bring a lot of value to today's conversation. So super excited about it. Tell us a little bit about just your background, and how you came to be at GT Promotions.
Thanks, Ron. Actually, I bring about 41 years of management experience, but I literally grew up in the grocery business. My dad was in the grocery business. He managed as a vice president a retail grocery chain out of Ocala, Florida, as well as a convenience store chain under the same umbrella. So literally at 5 years old, I used to go to work with my dad during the summer. And his employees during school years would drive me to school at an elementary next to it once I got old enough to go to elementary school. So at a very young age, I learned the grocery business. I used to run a register standing on a milk crate. And the older customers used to get the biggest kick out of a 6 or 7 year old on a milk crate running a register. So they'd all line up in my line to get to talk to me. So I learned the grocery business from ground up, every department, gravitated from that as I got older into the supply chain business, and part of that was entertainment distribution. And then from there, in 2008, we decided to open up our own company, a brokerage that would consist on really focusing on not only bringing products to the market, but growing products that were also in the market. And part of that is to really understand the retail customer in which you're wanting to do business with. So we do that first and foremost for all of our clients, is to understand where that product is going to go and what's expected of.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's start there, because I mean, that's your bread and butter. That's what you do day to day. And thanks for sharing your background experience there. I mean, obviously, literally growing up in the world of grocery and convenience stores, I mean, that's pretty powerful. And you've obviously seen it change quite a bit in that time, right? Like you've seen it's morphed many different ways, I'm sure, in that time. But I mean, I think the common denominator, as you probably know, right? People have to go to the store and they have to buy things, right? And it's that part has not changed. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about brands that are, maybe it's their first foray into retail grocery, right? And they don't know where to start. Maybe they've been approached by a buyer. Maybe they're looking to get, of course, brands are always looking to get in front of buyers. Like, when should a brand start to have that conversation? When they start seeing traction in other channels? Like, should they go to trade shows? What's your first kind of step for maybe an emerging brand?
Usually a food item, a grocery item, they'll start off with a convention. They'll go to a food show, and they may be approached by a retailer. whether that's to embrace in their brand or maybe take what they're doing and offer it in a private label. My recommendation is if you have that privilege and you have a major retailer interested in your product, you really need to get hooked up with a broker, a marketing specialist that understands that particular retailer and understands that particular retailer really, really well. Once that retailer engages with you, and let's say they want to go private label or they're interested in your brand, you really have to know what the expectations are. You start stumbling through a conversation with them of not knowing, and that will turn the retailer off very, very quickly. You can have the greatest product in the world, but if they don't think you're prepared for that kind of task, it will fall on deaf ears.
Yeah, because from the retailer's perspective, right, I mean, they're approaching a bunch of different brands at these shows, let's say, right? Let's say it's, it could be Expo West, it could be the Fancy Food Show, whatever it may be. Big shows like that, it could be more, smaller, maybe more regional shows. But the buyer's approaching a bunch of products, and they're looking for maybe trends, right? They know trends are happening in the space. They say, hey, this product's on trend, or this is becoming a trend, or we need more things, diversity in our store like this in terms of product mix. And so they want to take that product to put it on the shelf tomorrow, probably, but essentially, right? Obviously, we're talking about the planning process there. But you're right, there's so much a brand has to do to be ready. And you mentioned, too, I think a really important point is they've got to be the right fit. You got to know that because every store and chain is different, right? So everybody operates differently. So what are the big things a brand needs to have and a broker can help with, like right off the bat? Like what are the biggest things that they need to have ready to go so when that retailer's ready to push a PO, they can hit the ground running?
Well, one thing is you have to understand that retailers today aren't really engaging in a lot of brands that they have to help the supplier build or the brand owner to build. There's only one brand in that retail outlet that they are willing to grow and invest in themselves, and it's their private label brand. So any brand outside of that, they're expecting that you have already started to get traction with it, that you already have a marketing plan. The marketing plan typically has to be in place and functioning prior to building consumer awareness. So that's your first step. If you are approached by a retailer and they like your product, but they're wanting to look at private label, one of the most common mistakes that are made is, well, will they also bring in my branded? That's not the time to have that discussion. The time for that is once you have become a private label partner, because you truly are a partner at that point, your opportunities to do other projects with a retailer can vastly grow very quickly. But most people that do not understand that part of it will die on the vine by that conversation and interaction with the retailer taking too long. When they approach you, they have a timeline, and when you're trying to get educated about what they expect, you're going to ask a lot of questions that retailer's going to say, I would have thought they'd have known that. One could be pack size, pallet height. These are simple fundamentals, but if you do not understand them, it can stop the wheels turning instantly.
Yeah, we see the same kind of thing in the Amazon world, right? It's like to no fault of their own, right? Like every brand kind of has its blinders on as they're building their brand and they're kind of growing it, right? And they're focusing on what's right in front of them right then. And yeah, they're not thinking about pack size or pallet height at that moment because
That's right.
They're just kind of reacting to things as it's happening, right? But then you kind of got to grow up a little bit really fast. It'd be a good way to say it, and right? And knowing all that and knowing it and be ready to give it to them and be ready to go. Let's go back real quick to that private label conversation because that was really something obviously private labels are huge for a lot of stores out there. And, I think about Kirkland as like one of the biggest, the biggest brand like in the world pretty much, but I think GMV, right? When you calculate it all together. And obviously the margins that retailers can make, that's why they love private label, right? But like, talk to us about your experience, your expertise, and what do you recommend for brands when that maybe retailer approaches a brand and says, hey, do you want to do private label? We'd love to maybe private label this. I can see, a lot of brands have pride in their brand they've built. At least in my experience, they're like, oh, I don't want to private label this. I want my brand to be on the shelf. What's your experience and what do you advise brands in that case if a retailer does approach them about that?
It really would depend on the retailer themselves. But if you're talking about a large regional type retailer here in Florida, the largest regional grocery retailer is Public Supermarket. And I do a lot of business with Public Supermarket. If they are interested in a private label with anyone, as most regional retailers would be, I would highly recommend to engage in that, but also try to find someone that has a vast amount of experience with that particular retailer. They need to understand the culture of that retailer, what their demands might be. Most every decent-sized grocery retailer in the market today has a report card, a supplier report card, and you have to know how to manage that rating. That scorecard is very, very important to the supplier. That's what will dictate them continuing to do business with you. That's what will dictate if they're going to grow with you. So those report cards are incredibly important. But also when you start that private label conversation, you need to know too, there's also some testing requirements, which it starts with GFSI. Most every retailer will ask, are you GFSI certified?
Got it. And going back to that kind of that private label conversation a brand might have with a retailer, I think it comes down to as well, like, can maybe swallow your pride a little bit and maybe getting in good grace with that retailer, but also going back to the educational component you mentioned, like all the stuff you have to provide. Again, that echoes the experience of like working with a company like yours, because you're right. I mean, a buyer doesn't want to answer, hey, I have a follow-up question about the test requirements and this and that, and what about the scorecard? What does it mean to do that? A buyer doesn't want to get an email with 20 questions plus, right? And clarify a bunch of these things. So obviously someone like you who has experienced different retailers, knows what each one's asking for, you can provide that expertise, right, on a per retailer basis, really, and probably also like a per like kind of a product group basis as well, right?
Absolutely. And what so many of them brand owners don't understand is they think it's going to ding their profit margin because of the retailer demanding such a sharp cost. And the rule of thumb is that they're going to have a national equivalent, and they want to be 20% in retail below that equivalent, and they want their average standard gross margin. My experience with that is if you're a brand owner, you're going to spend more than that on your marketing efforts, and you still have an 82% failure rate of your brand being successful. So my recommendation is always, to me, I would be very flattered if I had a brand and someone like a Public Supermarket was interested in having you produce it in their private label. I couldn't move fast enough towards that. But there again, you have to have the right education of understanding what is going to be the national equivalent and what is the steps to go through.
Yeah, I love that. The way I totally saw the visual in my head, right? We talked about the margin and like the marketing dollars. I definitely want to get to the conversation here of when you actually do bring your own brand to shelf, what that's going to require versus like your hit of margin in doing private label. Yeah, it pretty much washes out there. So
just imagine in a single market like Tampa, Florida, Orlando, Florida, Miami, Florida, which is here local for us. If you wanted to do a 30-second commercial that you wanted to run it during a prime time in any one of those markets, you're going to spend about $1.5 million in one of the markets. If you want all three, you can probably get a discount down to about 2.8. That's a lot of dollars. And if you're not willing to do that, and then you have to promote it within the programs of the retailer. You have to participate in their ads, their BOGOs, their TPRs, in order to build the recognition inside of their four walls.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. So let's go back to that conversation a brand might have with the buyer, right? Bring them into the regional grocery, let's say Publix for this example. All right, so a buyer says, hey, we want to bring you in private label or directly with your brand. What happens next? Like, what are the next things that you mentioned testing, right? That's a big thing. And then when would a brand want to get a broker like yourself involved? Would they want to do that? Do they want to have that ready to go? Obviously, it's one to get approached by a buyer. So when do you recommend that a brand start, looking for the services of a broker?
As soon as possible. I mean, if you have a brand and you're passionate, it used Publix for an example. You're just become familiar with Publix and you say, wow, I'd like to have my brand in Publix. That's the point of engagement. That's when you really should engage a broker. The broker's going to know what the category review schedule is. They're going to know what's required prior to that. And hopefully they'll have relationships with a category manager or with a buyer or even a VP that may be able to fast track it in there a lot faster.
Okay. All right. So let's say it's brought in, the retailer says, let's go. What needs to happen next? What is the brand? Like, I guess what's the responsibility of the brand? Like, where does the lines stop of a brand, broker, retailer kind of thing?
Well, in our case, it never stops. We are intent that we're going to walk that thing all the way through, and not just the buying part, but existing on the shelf, how to grow. We view it a little bit different than a lot of folks in the aspect of the job starts once it hits the shelf, not when the buyer says yes. So we'll teach our clients what to look for and how to get set up into EDI, all of the fundamentals that get you to that point. First PO is cut, you're talking about 6 months later, in many cases, 4 to 6 months after the category review is when you're going to get your first PO. At that point, we've already educated the supplier, palleted what the pallet size and scope should be, the individual pack counts of which they should be, labeling on the cases, labeling of the pallets are correct and ready to go. At that point, you're typically, with most any retailer, once it hits the shelf, you're going to have a new item tag put in front of it. I don't want to run the first promotion until about 30 days. I think it's exciting for a customer to see that you have a new product available. After that, you've got to start your in-store promotions. In most of the retailers as well, some of the expense the brand owner will never think of is the merchandising of the set itself. That's usually third-partied out to merchandising companies to cut that item in, and there's called fair share merchandising fees that are also charged annually to each of the suppliers, and that's calculated on the amount of items within that subcategory and what the dollars yours represents as the total.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a whole, going back to getting the first product in the store, right? You typically got free fills, right? Like, so typically you're filling each store with a free case of product, right? And then you've got all these marketing expenses that are kind of, is it like picking from a menu? Is it like options or some required by the retailer? And like, what do you recommend as the expert?
Well, what they usually do, most any retailer, in some do the launch a couple different ways. Some of them want a free fill. Some of them want a slotting allowance based on the number of stores you're going to. They want a guarantee of how many promotions you're going to do with them. They will have a minimum amount of expectation for you to promote your product through their vehicles. And they have many different ways of doing it. It can be a simple TPR, temporary price reduction, for 4 weeks. You can do biweekly ads. You can do a weekly ad, but you have to be committed to doing those programs.
Yeah.
And most retailers want at least quarterly, and then they may come out with a special holiday ad that they really want you to reduce your prices to make a bigger offering through that time frame, and that's where you need to be prepared and ready. So if you have a broker that understands all of this going into it, they can also help you with where you really need to be in your everyday costing of that item to the retailer to be able to afford those programs and to be able to participate at the level in which you need.
Yeah, because you obviously want to stay the retailer's good graces, right, and be there forever. Because I've seen that happen before with brands where it's like they don't realize the margin hit that they may have to take because they need to participate in these programs, right? And obviously that can lead to cash flow issues, which I do want to touch on cash flow in the future in a little bit here, but for sure, that's a big part of it. What are the keys to staying in the good graces of the retailer? Like you talked about participating in some of these programs. I'm sure that's part of it too. But what are the big keys to like, it's one thing to get into a retailer, right? And we've also seen where it happens where people grow too fast and they just can't manage it and they get kicked out essentially. But what are the keys to staying in those good graces?
Well, one is, again, you have to understand the culture of each retailer. You got to know who they are, who they're appealing to, and what is their history. So that's a big help. If you understand that, then you should understand how to do business with that retailer. There are some categories within a supermarket that are very, very difficult in staying, having staying power. And condiments is one of them. It flushes out a lot. But typically, overall, the things that you should do is make sure you're maximizing your scorecard. That's number one. You'll never grow if you're underscoring in your performance. Number two, promote your product as aggressively as you can. I tell all of my clients, I actually do an annual promo calendar for each and every customer, for each and every or client, for each and every retail partner.
Wow.
So we plan that out a year ahead. And we supply that to the retailer during the category review, not just for new products, but current products that are on the shelf can't be forgotten during a category review. You've got to remind the buyer of your value.
Yeah, because I mean, and they probably love seeing that, right? They want to see a plan. Yes. They don't want to just come in there and see, hey, we want to keep doing business with you. They want to see a plan of how you're going to continue what you've done and then potentially keep growing, right?
Well, buyers are very busy, and so are the category managers. And so what we try to do is we will use the retailer system to gather sales. We will go back and share them with the buyer. Now, the buyer has all the capability of pulling them themselves, but do they have the time? So we want to be that friendly reminder, Mr. Buyer, we just did a BOGO on a carbonated beverage that has never done a BOGO before, and just wanted to let you know that you went up 1,100% on that particular promotion. And here's what we're going to do to schedule the next one.
Yeah. That's interesting. Is there much data on, or in your world, on using those promotional items, whether it be a BOGO, a discount, whatever it may be, to, a lot of these CPG type products or, repeatable type purchases? Let's use a beverage, right? Maybe like kind of a sparkling beverage, right? That's kind of been on trend more in the last probably 5 or 10 years, like another sparkling flavored water, right? Is there data that supports like, hey, we did X promotion and it increased our repeat, increased the sell-through rate?
Oh, yeah. What we see is if you do a typical TPR, which is probably one of the most inexpensive promotions that you can run, during the promotion itself, we usually see a 20 to 30, sometimes a 40% increase in unit sales. The other thing that we see is you retain maybe 11 to 20% range afterwards. So you want to follow it up. Again, you want to give it just enough time to where you hit the customer again, and automatically you're going to pick up 11 to 20% more consumers than you did on the last one. And then if you're successful with the same percentage, you are staircasing your sales or elevating them in a bell curve upward.
That makes sense, right? It's like you don't want to do it just once and never do it again, because you want to keep growing those sales. That's what the brand and the retailer want to see, right? They want to see a kind of a win partnership. That's what all these arrangements are, right? It's like everybody wins, right? The broker wins, the brand wins, the retailer wins.
Absolutely. And what we've noticed and what we do is we always have our clients are going, wow, I get the scan back on what's going to be deducted. And my goodness, it's $11,000 deduction because of the number of units that went through the register. What we do here is we immediately go into the system and we start pulling records of most retailers will start to order a product for your promotion 2 weeks before it begins, and they'll order specifically for that promotion 2 weeks into it. So 2 weeks before, 2 weeks into it. We go in and we actually pull how many units did they actually order? What did you pay? Because it's at full gross. And then you have the deduction. So we'll take that and calculate it for them and actually show them that your increase in order activity at a full gross has paid for most of the actual scan back itself.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right? It's one of those things where brands can get fixated. We all do, right? You get fixated on that upfront cost or what that one line item is, and you don't realize that, no, this is what you got because of it, right?
You have to get the brand owner to understand there's a difference between a line item cost and an actual investment. And that promotion is a marketing investment, not just a line item deduction.
Yeah, I love the thought on that, right? I think we do the same kind of thing in the Amazon ecosystem. Now you can do subscribe and save coupons, right? So you've always been able to do discount when someone subscribes and save repeat purchases, right? But now you can actually incentivize someone to do it for the first time, which is the same kind of thing, and layering that in multiple times to be able to grow that subscriber count over time. Let's continue that kind of theme of e-commerce and retail. Obviously, you've seen it all. Every day, more and more. Again, people still go to, I'm a big online shopper, but I still got to go to my local store and buy groceries every now and then. But we're seeing a big blend of the two platforms. I think about, obviously, the, one of the 900 Product Girls that were in Walmart. They have a very tech-forward platform with grocery pickup, grocery delivery, and now it's almost seamless when you look at items. Like, are you buying it from the local store, or is it just getting shipped to you? Oh, and if you have Walmart Plus, you may not even think about the difference. So it's really interesting. So talk to us about that. Like, where do you see, obviously there's always going to a place for in-store, right? But
yes,
is it blending more and more and more? Do you see that continuing to converge more?
Strangely enough, we've seen a few years back, especially during COVID, you've seen a huge spike of home delivery, and for all the right reasons. Since then, the industry has actually seen some restriction of that. More and more is going back to the store. But if you really drill down into it, what's also being noticed is the deep discounters, the retailers that really focus on low cost or EDLC, everyday low cost. They have a higher percentage of the online shopper than the full service high-low supermarkets do.
Does a brand need to worry about that? Do they need to worry about the online component of that retailer when they're getting into the store? So is it really still at this point two separate channels? Even if it's that retailer's online channel, like if it's Publix kind of online channel, or do they need to kind of focus on that still, both at the same time?
Well, everything you do to promote your product inside of the brick and mortar is also offered by the brick and mortar on their online. So if you're going to do a 20% off retail for 4 weeks, it also is 20% off of your online shopping. So it really runs parallel. You don't really have to worry about it. Some of the programs that you might want to invest in is direct-to-consumer marketing, which is also offered by most of the bigger chains. So they'll look at your product and say, we do have a couponing program that's direct email or direct mail to their home of customers that fit the profile of what your brand and your product is going to target. So those programs are also available. Typically, they're reserved for large brands that are very well established. And there's the beauty of a private label. If it's being promoted in any way, shape, or form, the retailer is paying for that themselves out of their everyday gross margins.
That makes sense, right? They have the data. All of these retailers have the data now of who the consumer is, of who that product would fit, and if they can target them directly, that's great. One thing I sometimes think romantic about, because I'm a big online shopper for even groceries, right? But there is something about walking into the store, because what you miss with online is you miss product discovery, right? You miss seeing what's out there, what's on that end cap, or what has that new tag on it. And I don't feel like I don't get that. That's still missing from the online component in a lot of channels, right? Even Amazon and even these grocery retailers own online channels. Is there a way to combat that through the online part, or is there a way that you recommend? Is this other promotional angles to get kind of in front of those buyers, whether they're buying in-store or online?
Well, you can only influence a consumer so much. If someone is truly developed a culture of, I think it's a waste of time to go to a supermarket and I want to spend my time doing other things, I'll order online, it's going to be very difficult to change that. The best thing you can do is keep doing what you always do inside of the store, because if you look at it percentage-wise, you still have the majority of the consumers going through your front door. And so you need to focus on keeping that. Publix supermarket is near and dear to our heart. It's right in our backyard. It's the oldest chain in the state of Florida. And their motto is where shopping is a pleasure. Well, that's their culture. And when you go through their front door, you smell the fresh deli, you smell the fresh bakery, you see what new items are. You can certainly see them online as well. You won't get the same impact. But there are consumers that you will never change. They're going to want to order online. We also see a group that wants to order certain items online, other items they do not. So the most part of what we see online is center store, non-perishable. They seem to toiletries and such as that, no problem, order online. When it comes to fresh produce, deli goods, bakery, and meat department, seafood, they tend to want to go to the store.
Yeah, makes sense. Anything different the brands need to do for like these more maybe, they're definitely more regional or lower store count retailers, like I think like a Sprouts Market, or I know I was just down in your neck of the woods in Florida. I was down in Anna Maria Island in March. My parents spent a few months each winter, and I had the privilege of going to I think it was Detweiler's supermarket. Yeah. Yeah, it was an amazing store. It was a neat little store, right? Very clean, well laid out. Is there any different strategy for stores like that where it's like, should brands be focused on, maybe it's a lower store count? I don't know how many of those stores there are, to be honest with you, but it's a lower store count, but it's a way to get started. Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, definitely lower. So yeah.
Henry Detweiler is the founder of it. I started off as a produce stand, a roadside produce stand, and grew it into what you've seen when you're down there, which is just absolutely a remarkable store. I can tell you that from a brand side, it's very difficult to really properly support a retailer of that size. And the challenges are, most of them do not have their own warehouse. So you're either going to have to offer DSD or you're going to have to find a distributor. The distributors, of course, have their own set of markups. So now you're involving, instead of going to a retailer direct to their warehouse, you have now a third-party distributor. So you are adding costs. If you're fortunate enough, you brought up Detweiler's. Detweiler's is actually as small as they are. They're building their own DC, their own warehouse to be self-distributed. If there's anything I can ever tell smaller retailers to do, is that's the smart thing to do. Self-distribution will help you control your cost and be competitive in the market. A brand should still offer the same promotions to a smaller retailer as they would a larger retailer. There's still a dedicated consumer base there. The difficulty is if they're having to go through a distributor, they'll still offer you the same percentage, but it's going to be at the distributor's markup, less the percent of discount for the promotion.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. I could talk about that even more, that store, but it was a very, again, beautiful store and just really well done, laid out, and just the way
they're good people.
It seems you can tell they take a lot of pride in their stores, and I think about like just the merchandising of everything. It's really well done. Let's go back to that you mentioned distributors, right? And so that's a whole nother kind of model, a whole nother layer sometimes of the grocery industry, right? You have the big ones like a KeHE or UNFI, right? That you kind of like
CNS.
Talk to me about like, the brands. When did they go to distributors? Is that because a lot of brands see it as almost like a, hey, a check mark. I'm in KeHE, I'm in UNFI, I'm in CNS. They see that as like a milestone. Like, when should that play into their brand? I mean, you have to be in certain stores, but should they be seeking that out initially?
That's a really good question. Typically, what you see is if they're seeking out one of those individuals, company that you mentioned, and that they have all their benefits, and then there's some other sides to it that would benefit having a really good broker that's willing to bird dog deductions and damages and challenging those things, because they can get out of hand. Those companies were founded on small brands desperate for distribution and would overlook most any business practice just to get distributed. Also, a great portion of them are sent to those entities by retailers because they're anticipating they're going to be a low volume SKU, but again, they think there's a need for it, but they have no room in their warehouse. So they will push on that direction. Most of the larger retailers have special relationships with those major three, and they have an agreement of a set markup percentage.
Yeah, so it's already baked in. That makes sense. Yeah, it's a whole other world, right? A whole other world to navigate there.
We talked about retail culture and understanding report cards and such as that and how they operate. You better understand the same thing for those distributors and the culture of the retailer you want your product to go to. So it is really important to understand their policies and procedures.
Yeah, a lot of different people to keep happy, right?
Well, they can get very expensive if you're not careful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about this whole thing involves, it's not cheap to build any business, right? It's really not.
No.
And so cash flow is the number one killer of all businesses, not just in the grocery or CPG world. Talk to us about that. Like, how do brands navigate when, hey, I've got that big PO now, the dollars are going to be coming, but I've got to produce this, I've got to do all this other stuff. Like, are there smart ways? I mean, do brands need to have deep pockets? So they need to have money on standby. They need to have a bank that is along with them for the ride, and maybe investors. Like, what's your whole, like, any words of wisdom, I guess, to share with the audience on that?
Well, it really all depends on that company's financial position. Are they cash strong, or are they a startup company? Do they have investors, or are they backed by small business loans? I don't care what size business you are, you need to know your costs, and you need to know how to manage your costs. I've learned over the past 41 years, as I get a little older, I seem to get a little smarter in some areas. And one of them is be smart enough to ask someone else to come look at your business. Mm-hmm. When I sign up a client, we want to go to their facility and walk that facility, look at their books with them, understand what they're paying. We don't want to just sell their product. We want them to be profitable while selling their product. But they need to know their cost, and they also, it doesn't hurt, have somebody else look at your business and may be able to find you some cost savings you might not have thought of.
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, you want them to win today and a year from now and 10 years from now, right? Like everybody wants to be in this for the long haul and succeed. You don't just want a flash in the pan. That doesn't really help anybody. That makes sense. Right.
Well, your larger companies are very successful too with when they set up a board of directors, and they pick people from many different industries. Smaller businesses might not have the same luxury of having a board of directors that could have a president of a bank and so forth and so on. But if you have a really good food or non-food broker that understands the industry itself, manufacturing, distribution, and retail, that can be a key asset to have them come in and do an analysis of your business and work as a partner instead of two separate entities. Cost is what's going to help them in the long run, and more cash flow is going to assist them with their marketing.
Yeah, no, for sure. As we wrap up here, Jim, I would love to hear from your experience, what should brands look for in choosing the right broker? Like when they're out there, and what are the important attributes that you feel are the best that they should kind of watch for?
One is what we notice in our broker industry and network is so many of them feel that, again, the sale is complete once the buyer says yes. That's not when the sale starts. It starts when it hits the shelf, and let's go to work, roll our sleeves up, and make some positive things happen. You need to pick someone that has good morals, same in runs parallel with the company itself, the client, the brand owner, and someone that you believe understands the industry, not just that particular retailer, but the industry in whole, that can give you good, sound advice and not selfish advice or advice being selfish, meaning that they're simply looking at just how to increase sales that increases my commission and forgetting about the profitability of the brand and the client.
Yeah, that's all great stuff. So this has been an amazing conversation, Jim. I could feel like I could deep dive into all these different topics with you, but we'll keep it there. Maybe we'll have to have you back on to share some more of that amazing knowledge you've got. So where can people find you, connect with you? If you want to drop your email, you can. Where can they connect with you at?
My email address is GT, as in George Tom, Promotions, plural, LLC.com. We don't have a website. One of the reasons we don't is we've been able to build our business based on word of mouth, either from clients that we've had tremendous amount of success with, and many times retailers sending them to us.
Yeah, that's a great way to build a business, and you're obviously doing something right if that's happening. And so just to clarify, it's Jim at GT Promotions LLC.com.
I'm sorry.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it's FishJ, FISHJ, at GT Promotions LLC.com. I'm sorry.
Got it. No, that's all right. I want to make sure we had the right one. So, Jim, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. Thanks.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks so much for Jim for coming on the show. What an amazing episode and just a wealth of knowledge. Again, I could have kept, I know it says a lot with guests. I could have kept talking to Jim for another hour on just there's so many deep dive things within the grocery industry that a lot of branches don't know and they don't know until they get there. And if they knew up front, it would just save them a lot of pain, time, and probably money. So thanks so much for Jim for coming on. We really appreciate it. And hopefully you got some value out of this episode. And if you did, please share with a friend. And please do what you can do on these platforms to help grow this podcast. That's how it reaches more folks just like you. Rate us, subscribe, leave a comment, thumbs up, whatever platform you're on, whether it's Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, doesn't matter. Please interact with the show in some way. It just helps get our name out there a little bit faster. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Expert CPG Commerce Podcast.